you so much for coming out tonight, and those who are joining us virtually. I will start now. Welcome to Cascode's third public art program entitled Art Meets Data Science. I am LaJuné and I'm the Executive Director of Dashboard. We are excited to produce this program and celebrate the very talented creatives featured on the panel. To get started, let me first introduce you to our moderators for this evening, Eto Otitigbe and Amanda Kadari. Eto is a polymedia artist who was commissioned by PHDC, Percent for the Art program, and Penn Engineering to make Cascode a public artwork that intersects data, science, community health, and environmental sustainability. This project was awarded to Eto at the beginning of this year and will be completed in 2024. The final artwork will be installed on 34th and Chestnut Street, the new location for the Amy Gutman Hall. In addition to public artworks, Eto is interested in recovering buried narratives and giving form to the unseen by intersecting historical references, community, and generative design into biomorphic form. Eto recently received the 2022 Artist Fellowship from the Augustine State Garden Foundation. He was a member of the design team for the Memorial of Enslaved Laborers at UVA in Charlottesville, which was completed in 2020. His studio is developing public artworks that will be installed in New York and Virginia. Currently, he is a professor of sculpture at Brooklyn College. Amanda Kadari is a post-recovering visual artist currently DJing between Cairo, Egypt, and Houston, Texas. She has exhibited internationally and is a grantee from the Arab Fund for Arts and Culture. Amanda has been collaborating with Eto since 2016, and in 2018 they curated a video art exhibition which 16 international artists were featured in an abandoned warehouse in Denmark. For the past year, she has been the studio manager for Eto. I will now hand it over to Amanda to introduce our guest of honor.
We are elated to have these three panelists here for this event. I know the three of you are very busy, so we are very appreciative of your time. To the right of me is LaJuné McMillian. To her right is Mindy Seu, and to her right is Dr. Synatra Smith. Their innovative and insightful practices speak on the importance of data equity, storytelling, visual culture, and hacking the archive. Each of them have numerous accomplishments, but I will abbreviate my introduction so that we can hear from them directly. LaJuné is a multidisciplinary artist and educator, creating art that integrates performance, extended reality, and physical computing to question our current forms of communication. They are passionate about stewarding spaces for liberated Black realities and the Black imagination. LaJuné breaks down systems and technologies that uphold systemic injustices to de-commodify our bodies, undo indoctrination, and make for different ways of being. In 2021, LaJuné's project, the Black Movement Library Portrait Series, was performed outside the Brooklyn Library. It was a large-scale, free, public, outdoor performance that included projections, sound, dance, and neuron caption suits. Excerpts from the event are documented online, and I highly recommend that you look at that. LaJuné has had the opportunity to show and speak about their work at Pioneer Works, National Sawdust, Tribeca Film Festival, Times Square, and Art and Code's Weird Reality. Mindy Seu is partial to lists and spreadsheets. She is a designer and technologist whose practice involves archival projects, technocritical writing, performative lectures, design commissions, and collaborations. Her latest writing surveys historical precursors of the metaverse and reveals the materiality of the internet. Her upcoming book, Cyber Feminism Index, is commissioned by Ribosome and presented at the New Museum in its online form and its printed form is a recipient of the Graham Foundation Grant. It gathers 3 decades of online activism and net art. It is currently on pre-order and will be available October 2022. The book launch is coming up on November 14th at the new museum, and I just realized that it sold out in less than 24 hours. She has lectured internationally and was a resident at McDowell, Sitterwork Foundation, Pioneer Works, and Internet Archive. She is currently an assistant professor at Rutgers Mason Gross School of the Arts and a critic at Yale School of Art. And lastly, but not least, is Dr. Synatra Smith, who is an Afrofuturist cultural preservationist focused on the ways in which Black cultural landscapes transform access to special collections and archives through a Black speculative methodology that utilizes extended reality and other digital humanities tools. She recently launched a project entitled Sacred Geographic Superimpositions, which documents and celebrates ephemeral Black public art in Philadelphia and creates a transformative archive that successfully takes research and data out of the academy and into a curated space grounded in storytelling, story mapping, and augmented reality. Thank you so much, the 3 of you, for being here. Oh, I'm not done yet. There's so many accolades. She currently serves as the co-chair of the Advocates for Black Representation Staff Working Group at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and she is the primary mentor for the Leading Fellows program at Temple University Libraries, hosted through Drexel University. Now, thank you so much for being here. I'll pass it to you, Eto.
Good evening, everyone who has the opportunity to attend in person and also the folks online. I'm really thrilled to throw this event here in the Rotunda, and I'm really thankful for the panelists to join us and share their practice with us. Because the Cascode project is about land, it's about space, and it's about sort of ways to experiment with it and reconfigure it, I'd like to start with, I'd like to share a land acknowledgement. We gather on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence we seek to honor and respect as the original caretakers of this land. We recognize the histories of land, theft, violence, erasure, and oppression that make our country, institutions, and ourselves who we are. As artists, designers, and cultural workers, we call upon the collective wisdom of many indigenous traditions, as well as the traditions of many Black and brown people, women, and queer people throughout history whose contributions are too often erased, respectfully. And before we get into our amazing panelists, I just want to share with you one of the early renderings for the Cascode project. This is a night view of the sculpture that we're in the design process and developing, that will be on 34th and Chestnut at the new Interdisciplinary Data Science Center. So our first speaker will be Dr. Smith.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here with you all and share this project. It's the augmented reality project that was mentioned in my bio. And I guess I could go to the first slide, huh? So it's called Sacred Geographic Superimpositions, and it's a reimagining of public art for us, by us, FUBU, as enshrined spaces. So this project actually came out of several projects that I was working on, kind of learning different skills, and then they just came together in a really nice way. I was learning how to do photogrammetry, which I'll explain later on in the presentation. And I work with the collections connected to Blackness in some type of way at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and at Temple University Libraries. So that we have the Charles L. Blockson Afro-American Collection at Temple University. And I'm working in the library of each of these institutions, and so I'm really grateful to be in a position where I get to kind of learn library skills, digital humanities skills. Specifically at Temple, I'm in the Scholar Studio, which is where we have like a VR lab and all this kind of like really cool gaming stuff, whether it's like physical tabletop board games or VR games. We are, as a staff, able to learn how to do those types of things. So this project was my opportunity to learn how to create augmented reality and do a little bit of mapping. I'm an anthropologist by training, so a lot of this is just kind of me skill building and also developing a methodology that I would be able to share out to small black institutions, which is where I originally came from. I was working at a small institution in Maryland, the Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center. And so I'm really excited about sharing my methodology and workflows as often as possible so that other folks can begin to do this type of work. So where I started was identifying my data sources. Like I said, this started from a lot of different smaller projects that I was working on. So on the right side, you see the Smithsonian American Art Museum's Art Inventories catalog. I was looking for outdoor sculptures that depicted Black culture in some type of way, and then I decided to kind of narrow down what could be included in my project by specifying that it had to be created by a Black artist. There's a lot of art in the city between the murals and outdoor sculptures that depict Black life but weren't necessarily painted or sculpted by a Black artist, so I wanted to be intentional about that. So from this Art Inventories catalog, there were maybe 10 or so objects on there, and I did some research on who the artists were. Based on what I could actually find about the artists, the 3 that are listed there, Nasaika, 3 Figures, and A Quest for Parody, were the only 3 that were included in the study from that list. I also was fortunate enough to kind of align with the Monumental Tour, which is a traveling exhibition of outdoor sculptures by Black artists that has been going around the country. And it happened to be here October of last year until January of last year, which was perfect timing for me because that's when I was working on the project. So I added 4 additional sculptures there that you see there. And there's also the brick house sculpture, which is on Penn's campus. It just wasn't included in any of these other lists. I just happened to know that it was there. And then also the African sculptures from the Philadelphia Museum of Art from a separate project, and 16 African instruments from the Charles L. Blockson Afro-American collection. I also reached out to Mural Arts Philadelphia to ask them like which of the murals that they've put up were by Black artists. So they sent me this list. It was called African American Iconic Images, so it was just murals that depicted things connected to Black folks. And I did research on those artists as well to identify which ones were by Black artists. And then of course, because public art is so ephemeral, a lot of the murals weren't there anymore. So I had to continue to that narrowed down the list even more. So I say all that to say this is a representative sample. There are 1,500 outdoor sculptures, 3,600 murals. This is Mural City, so there was no way I was going to include all of that. Again, I was just trying to learn a skill. So the first skill that I was able to somewhat master is photogrammetry, which is when you take photos of an object. It can be a small object like this water bottle, or it could be a large sculpture like the brick house sculpture that's on this campus. It's ginormous. And you take photos around the object, either rotating it on a turntable or physically moving around it, and then at multiple angles, and you can turn the camera along the way. So I had a DSLR camera. Sometimes the photos were taken horizontally, sometimes vertically. And I just kept going around in circles. So I determined that about 50 to 60 photos were what I needed for at least the small sculptures. There's like twice that many for the larger ones. I do have a video walkthrough of the workflow on TikTok, which you can find at bit.ly/PMA mask modeling, or scanning this QR code that is not going to be on the screen anymore because I got to move on. So I also use 3D scanning and 3D modeling in order to do this project. The object that you see all the way on the left is completely transparent, so photogrammetry wouldn't work with that, so I had to model that completely in Blender. And the murals also were not working very well with the photogrammetry workflow. So instead I used 3D scanning for those, and just happened to be able to use it for this brick house sculpture as well. And it's just an app that you can put on your phone. If you have a Pro, then you can use the LiDAR mode. Otherwise, photos work fine. I have an iPhone XR, so I was not able to use LiDAR mode, was able to get everything really nicely, clean it up in Blender. And then the last part of it was to do the actual, use all of these assets, right? So I created a mapping visualization, which I'll show you in a moment. You can go to it yourself if you like, bit.ly/sacredgs. And I also developed an augmented reality app that's for iOS only. So I created the mapping visualization so that you could see where in physical space all of these objects actually exist. And then I was kind of like, well, for AR, it would be cool to do more than just have a 3D model pop up on the screen, because you can go to Sketchfab and look at the 3D models. That's not really doing anything. So I decided to get a little funky with it and curated 24 individual altars. So I turned each of the public art 3D models into altars and placed objects around them that represented each of the elements. So I did all of that within Blender, which is a free software, and then developed the AR component in Unity, another free software, using the Vuforia plugin. So it's just an image-based project and not location-based. So if you physically go there and try to use the app, then nothing's going to happen. So I will quickly demonstrate the app. So when you go to the page, it starts off with this landing, and it has some information about the project and how to get to the AR. You have to give it access to your camera so that the AR function can work, and it pops up a 3D model on the screen. This is actually not a good one to start with. Okay, this one is better. It takes a moment to transition, apparently. Technology is always gonna technology. Let's see if this one will work. My phone has performance anxiety. I don't know why it does this. It was working fine earlier, but now I can't get any of these other. There we go. Okay. So the sculptures rotate 360. The murals just kind of pivot because there's not really anything on the other side of a mural 3D model. But if you look closely, you can see that there are objects placed all around, images of of something connected to the sculpture or the mural. So for this one, there's like a picture of the actual mural and something depicting Octavius Vicato. Let's see. Can I get another one to load? It would be really nice if I could. Might have to call it a day. It does work. It's just not working now. Believe me, okay, trust me, just use your imagination. But anyways, these are the kind of shining, the jewel of this project that I can't show off very well right now. There we go, yay! Okay, so that's one of the murals. So you see there's objects all around it, and it just kind of pivots back and forth because the backside is not very interesting. And that is my project.
Hello, everyone. My name is LaJuné McMillian, and I'm going to talk to you about a project that I've been working on called Black Movement Library. And essentially, I am a new media artist and creative technologist, and I've learned a lot of this work during my time as a student at NYU Tandon. And I was just really excited to learn about all the various different mediums that you could work with. I was introduced to motion capture and also introduced to physical computing and also to Unreal Engine, which is what I normally use for my visual processes. And so after school, I realized that my access to a lot of these different technologies was drastically limited. And from there, I began to think of ways to regain my access back into the space. And also not only make it a way for me to have access to these tools, but for the communities that I want to work with as well. And so I began this process of research around all of the various different free tools that are online that are quote-unquote accessible to us. And in the past few years, access to motion capture data, 3D character-based models, and software to make animation yourself has skyrocketed. From Make Human to Mixamo to Carnegie Mellon's motion capture database, the ability to make and finish polished projects has become easier for many. And while these resources are extremely helpful to create a range of projects, they lack tools to create diverse characters and movements unexplored by systems that center assumptions of neutrality. And so I began this project. It used to be called Black Movement Project, but since I've changed the name to Black Movement Library, and it started as this idea for an online database of Black motion capture data and Black character-based models. but I realized that when I first decided to make the project, I wasn't essentially thinking about all of the different ways we're already represented in the media, and I also didn't think about the project in a way where I could potentially be opening our culture up to being even more exploited and extracted than it already is. And so I began to sort of take a few steps back and prioritize what it means to build a community rather than just dive in and start building tools by myself. And so one of the main questions that I'm asking with this project is how can we discover, learn, invest in, and steward systems that prioritize liberation and abundance? And so from there, the library expanded into a space for activists, performers, and artists to create diverse extended reality projects, a space to research how and why we move, as well as an archive of our existence. This library seeks to grow community through performances, extended reality experiences, workshops, conversations, and tool making. And so the first part of this library is movement portraits. And essentially in traditional motion capture databases, you normally just see a list of movements, and the people who are actually giving their movements to that space are normally listed as subjects. And so it erases the person, it erases like their actual histories. And so for me with movement portraits, I'm asking how can I reinsert the histories of the people that I work with and make sure that people know where exactly their movement is coming from. And so movement portraits serve as a way to learn about the performers contributing their movement to the Black Movement Library, and it's asking this question of what happens when we ritualize the archival process of data collection and invite the community in as a witness. And so over the course of development, I do these interviews with each performer, learning their movement histories. Those interviews are embedded into soundscapes that performers move to, allowing the audience to dive into their lives and learn how Black movement has been used as a tool of preservation of Black culture, as well as a vehicle of self-evolution. And while they do start out as a real-time motion capture performance, they're also translated and archived as VR and single-channel video experiences. And so this allows the movement to be re-represented as an abstract digital memory of the performance day. Over the course of the year, I sit with the data and I relearn each performer through their movement and interviews, and I go through a process of reconstructing and diving into the visual process as its own ritual. And I'm pretty much asking how we translate digital representations of self and others. And so here is a video of the movement portraits performance on the Brooklyn Public Library. And so it was really cool. I got to invite some of my students to make movement portraits of themselves, and so the first 10 minutes are of their portraits, and then it transitions into 5 portraits that I made, and this happened all June 2021.
I realized dance is not only about me, it's literally driven by the music.
I think spirit as an energy.
As a soul,
Yeah, so they're all wearing the mocap suits, and then I'm just live DJing on the side, and it was super fun. Just pressing buttons and stuff. And then this is from the Times Square midnight moment that happened this past June 2022. So it was a year later. I was able to translate these into videos. Here's the video. Okay, also to date, the Movement Portraits has premiered as a live performance, but also the virtual reality experience did premiere this year at Tribeca Film Festival. It was just at London Film Festival, Games for Change and VR Days in Europe. And yeah, they've also been shown as just their video portraits too. Alongside with the portraits though, I do have a workshop called Understanding, Transforming, and Preserving Movement in Digital Spaces, which is a workshop to learn about extended reality tools in relationship to race, gender, and culture. And so we explore issues of cultural representation and exploitation through readings and discussions, while also providing an introduction to motion capture, rigging, and 3D environments. And so I've been able to tour the workshop around to various different institutions, which has been really cool. I also have a conversation series that brings together Black folks from different fields and from different perspectives to dive into all of these questions with the community. All of the conversations are recorded and archived in the library, and so I've been able to talk to so many various folks, and it's been really exciting. And just this past weekend, we organized a Black Movement in Digital Spaces, which is 2 days of programming. It was hosted by Recess Art Gallery, and essentially with this programming, it featured motion capture demonstrations alongside movement-based and meditation-based workshops, panel discussions, along with the new movement portrait reveal. And then essentially now I'm working on an ice show called The Unseen, which is a real-time motion capture performance on ice, showcasing, celebrating, and honoring Black figure skaters of the past and the present. And it follows my great-great-uncle Slick, who taught himself how to figure skate at Rockefeller Center. And while he gained a following, little is known about him today in the public eye. And so essentially what I hope to do is find a lot of these various different Black families who have ancestors who have figure skated and then turn that into a motion capture piece. Yeah, and these are some pictures of him skating. Yeah. And so essentially, I just want to end with this. Movement does not only represent our individual experiences, but it also represents our collective memory, transcending space, time, and oppressive social structures. It allows us to connect to each other, our ancestors, our deepest selves, and it gives us a space to communicate to our future. Movement is a technology, holding the stories of our existence globally. And our bodies and movements are more than just data points and avatars, they hold our humanity. And so it's time for digital spaces and all spaces to reflect that. The Black Movement Library is a movement. It's a movement that celebrates Black history and Black culture, a movement that serves our community to learn and grow as society evolves. It's a movement that holds us accountable in the ways we deal with Black people, our movements, our bodies, and our lives. Thanks.
Thank you so much, LaJuné and Dr. Smith. It's great to follow these great presentations. I think before I start, I'd like to say again, congratulations, Eto, and thank you so much for bringing us all together here. And thank you also to Amanda and Ocean and Chrissy and the entire Dashboard/Cascode team. So what I'm doing today is giving you a very snapshot of a larger lecture that you can access at mindyseu.com/sharing. A lot of my works are very browser-based, so it's going to live in the medium that they're supposed to be presented in. I'm just going to pull up my phone so I can keep track of the time. So we'll begin. Girls need modems. A gender changer figures out how her computer works, and she is not afraid of taking it apart. This glitch is a correction to the machine. So for the past 3 years, I've been working on a project called the Cyberfeminism Index, and here you're seeing its 4th and hopefully final version, a printed catalog, which, as Amanda mentioned, is coming out in roughly 2 weeks. So today I'm going to give you a glimpse at the various translations this project has taken in 4 parts. Another thing I really like about browsers is it's by nature open source. So if you go into any browser and go to this URL, if you click inspect, you'll see the source code. So in the source code, not only is this the way the browser is reading this code to present in the front end for all of you, it also has notes for humans, which you'll see in green. And these human notes are called HTML comments. So because I'm giving a truncated view, you can kind of refer back to this later for the additional citations and context, but it'll give you a sense of the world we're trying to make. I have long been a gatherer. And though we rarely hear the word used literally anymore, we do hear its sister, gathering, and we are in a gathering today. But the term gatherer we more immediately associate with our origins as hunter-gatherers. We went, we gathered goods, and then we returned home to our kin, sharing as survival. So this was one of the opening lines of an essay I wrote for the Knight Foundation, and an essay called On Gathering. And even if this was focusing on gathering in its material form, a collection, all of us are natural collectors, we want to bring things into the world, into our homes. We're also social gatherers. We want to commune and activate these collections with the people that we care about, our kin. So this project has really been an exploration of how we can gather collections intentionally for specific people, particularly of communities that we're already a part of. So the first form of this project was an open source, open access spreadsheet. And Google Sheets and the Google Suite has a lot of problems at large, but if you kind of scrub through this, you'll see that things don't fit neatly into individual categories. If we do a quick detour into the history of spreadsheets, we'll find that the first GUI-based spreadsheet, graphical user interface, came out in 1985. This is version 1.5 in 88. And physical ledgers go back all the way to the printed word, or the written word, rather. But for us, it was quite important to figure out why we are continuing to put ourselves into a rigid X and Y axis. This is the Talmud, a page of the Talmud, the religious and theological doctrine of Judaism. I don't follow this religion, I don't follow this language, but it's an important reference in the history of the internet because this was a model for how we can shape multiple citations. This is kind of painting how that looks. So the center column is called the Mishnah. The columns flanking this are commentaries by religious scholars on the Mishnah. And the outermost column is commentaries on the commentary. So built into the structure of the page, you have this dialectic of different voices and opinions that are all kind of co-authoring a text. And this is how people were conceiving the internet to be created, which is why we now have things called links to connect different sources. This is Ted Nelson, who is considered the father of the concept of hypertext or hyperlinks. And he was creating, or here he is holding up a page of the Talmud. Also important noting that analog hyperlinks have also been around since the origins of the printed word. Think of bibliographies, footnotes, indexes. Here we have a page of the Whole Earth Millennium Catalog. On page 70, we can jump to something on page 90. But this co-authoring was a really important reference for when we were trying to conceive of the second translation of the CyberFem project, which was how the website. Two questions that we had in mind. The first is, how do we future-proof a website? And the second is, how can we visualize citations? So this is what the internet would have been had the World Wide Web not taken off. This is the two-dimensional version, also created by this figure, Ted Nelson. Here, they were trying to visualize the citations between pages. So anytime you link to a secondary page, not only does it pull up that page, it shows the original context that text came from. So again, understanding that knowledge is not built from an individual alone, but rather through all the references surrounding it. The second is, how do we future-proof a website? Well, we can try to do our best to think about these different strategies. One of them is to use the backbones of the internet, HTML and CSS. So here we have a website from 1997, a NetArt piece, and here's how it looks 2 decades later in Rhizome's emulator. It might be kind of washed out on that screen. But in some ways, while the website has changed, it's also been designed as the browser has been designed. So it's much higher resolution, we now have drop shadows, there's more space, etc. So these were things we were thinking about when building this website. So when you first arrive, it appears to be a somewhat standard table. But as you move through the site and select different entries at random or intentionally, it's added to the side panel, which we call the learning trail, to kind of build these associative links between the things that you're clicking. And just scrubbing through here. And at the bottom, you're also able to download a selection of all of your entries. We don't store anything on the client side, but it's something that you can kind of take home with you. And the third translation is this book. So we actually just made this QR code ring made, so if you want to pre-order the book, you can scan my finger later. But it's been a really interesting process to see how an anti-canon, or a corpus of information, could translate across different media and really show the same information in very different ways. So I know we're close on time. I just want to give a few examples of concrete examples of the index itself, and I'll read the words of the artists themselves. Let's try to zoom in a bit. Maybe we can't. This thumbnail is actually from a film produced by Martine Sims, but the quote is from her Mundane Afrofuturist manifesto. This dream of utopia can encourage us to forget that outer space will not save us from injustice, and that cyberspace was prefigured upon a master-slave relationship. While we are often othered, we are not aliens. Though our ancestors were mutilated, we are not mutants. Post-Black is a misnomer. Post-colonialism is too. The most likely future is one in which we only have ourselves and this planet. Sadie Plant wrote, "Discs are sucked into the dark recesses of welcoming vaginal slits, console cowboys jack into cyberspace, and virtual sex has been defined as teledildonics. By claiming the computer mouse as vulva, possibilities of bodies and sexual experiences are made multiple. Instead of jacking in, the vulva mouse clicks in, offering the power of the click or clit." And I'll just read this last one. This was by Dark Girl. This is called Dark Core by Gash Girl from 1993. "Stop fingering my separating holes, extending my oozing boundary. But in cypherspace, there are no bounds, or so they say. But in spiral space, there is no they, there is only us." Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for to all the panelists. Really appreciated hearing from you. So we're going to have a Q&A, but before we do that, we prepared a few questions kind of in response to some of the information folks shared. And Amanda and I will take turns with the questions. I'll take turns with the questions. First, Synatra, Dr. Smith. In visual art landscapes, have often been associated with expansive and romantic concepts. Do you think your project disrupts popular ideas of landscapes to make room for speculative possibilities?
So I really, okay, let's figure out where to hold the mic. I really like this question because I think within academia, within museums, especially in the social sciences, a lot of folks are so concerned with fact and what's the objectivity as if that exists, and what is actually in the collection and how are we interpreting it based off of how someone interpreted it possibly centuries ago. And so by applying this Afrofuturist conceptual lens to my work, I have been able to kind of do away with that in a sort of away with it. On the story map, that is the actual physical space. You can actually go to those spaces, and the things that are still there, you will see them. We were talking about it earlier that there are at least 3 of the sculptures that are on that map are not here anymore because they were part of a traveling exhibition. However, with augmented reality, I was able to get a lot more speculative and have a lot more fun with this project and not be so tied to what is actually there, which murals are physically there. that's when I got to kind of curate things in a way that was just my own reinterpretation of these artworks, of these sculptures, in a way that had nothing to do with like my scholarship or my institutions, and really just, I was sitting at a table, got some inspiration by looking over at a coffee table that's in my apartment that's kind of over time transformed into an altar that has plants, a sculpture from my mother's oldest sister, a backless pillow sham for some reason that my grandmother made that's you can't actually put a pillow in, and crystals and abalone shell and all of these different things. And I was like, this is my inspiration right here. I'm going to use this to create this AR content. And so I was able to really just have fun with this project in a way that I think if I had been kind of tied to an institution and what their expectations are and representing the institution on the web and everything, I wouldn't have been able to do this in this way. So I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of just go with what I wanted to do and use that speculative lens of like, well, what would this look like if these were altars instead of just simply the artwork? Because since things are constantly disappearing, public art is very ephemeral, I just wanted to kind of take a moment to honor those artworks that are still there or that were there while I was working on the project.
Thank you. And that dovetails into a question we thought about for LaJuné. But you know, these questions are open to everyone here on this panel, and this idea of play you mentioned, Dr. Smith and LaJuné, how important is play in your practice?
Yeah, so I guess for me, the way that I work is very organic. And so essentially whenever I'm working with a performer, well, in traditional, I guess, like motion capture environments, essentially you'll work with like a motion capture technician and they'll tell you everything that you can't do in the space. So it's like you can't jump or you can't spin, you can't roll around. And for me, I find that process very limiting. And so the first thing I tell people when I'm working with them is to move how you move. And if the technology can't capture that, then that's okay. I think that with that process, it sort of allows folks to really explore different movements and also explore their relationships with these tools. It's helped me a lot as well. I've been exploring this concept of moving away from motion capture and moving towards motion witnessing. So basically allowing the tools to be imperfect, the tools to see us imperfectly, and sort of using that as a way to really shift the different power dynamics that are embedded within tools and software. So yeah, it's all very like, we all just like sort of vibe together. And I'm just like, I'm like a VJ, so I just like sort of just press buttons and I'm having fun on the side, and then yeah, we're all just like having a jam sesh together for the most part when we create these portraits. So yeah.
That's incredible, and I think about this. Your practice is something that's dispersing, you know, bodies or ideas or concepts that are rigid or opaque, right? And opening up space, challenging misconceptions. So it made me think about Mindy, your project. And I'm wondering, what's the biggest or most common misconception for your project?
I think the other panelists can agree, but in building an informal anti-institutional archive, because of the connotations of the word archive, they assume it's objective and complete. But I think that the biggest misconception here is that, or what we're trying to push forward is this idea that it is always in progress, it's a living archive, and it's very, very much subjective and curated, even when it's crowdsourced and moderated. So I think that even in an institutional archive, I wish they were more forthcoming about this subjectivity, because it's very much documenting a specific history from a specific lens, not to mention extraction of these objects from their original environments and etc. So I think this idea of completion is something that I'm always trying to address and push forward.
Nice. Sorry about that. So this next question is for Dr. Smith again, and it relates to this idea of negotiating this work with larger institutions that Mindy spoke about. Can you talk about how your project negotiates the territories shared between academia, cultural commons, and DIY spaces? Curious also about what challenges do you face with regard to accessibility and institutional complexity?
So I am also fortunate to work from the library of two very large institutions. I work for the Philadelphia Museum of Art and Temple University Libraries. And so because these are such large, massive institutions, that means the library department is also pretty large. So there's lots of resources within that space that I can tap into. But also it means that we have our own social media and blogs and all that kind of stuff. So I don't have to get on a curatorial schedule at all. I can just work on my projects. I've posted on the Scholar Studio, which is at Temple, the Scholar Studio blog about a Wikidata project that I was working on. And that same project is also kind of consuming the Library and Archives blog at the PMA. And so I get to subvert a lot of the bureaucracy that my colleagues in other departments, especially in curatorial departments, have to really just deal with, because the curatorial calendar is set years in advance and all that, and I don't have to deal with that at all. So that makes it a lot easier for me to work on these projects. It makes it complicated with the institutions, because a lot of folks within or outside of my department don't understand the things that I'm working on, and so they just kind of, they don't get it until they see it, and then they're like, oh, this should totally be on the museum's website. It doesn't have to go there. I'm okay with it not being there, that's fine. I just want it to be on the internet, accessible for folks to get to. So which brings me to the second part of the question about accessibility. So as I said before, this is an iOS only app. I have an iPhone, I'm an Apple person, so that's how I developed it. But my highest priority wasn't about the specific device that could use it. It was more so about developing the workflow and determining whether or not this is something that small institutions can do. And the answer is yes, they totally can. And so, the app is free. You're able to go on the App Store. I'm also sharing my methodology as widely as possible. I've created TikTok videos on how to make 3D models, one using photogrammetry with a small sculpture at the PMA, and another one with one of the larger sculptures using the Polycam LiDAR 3D scanner app that was literally, I just downloaded it on my phone, took a bunch of pictures through the app, and the software kind of did its thing, and I cleaned it up in a separate software. So I'm really trying to make sure that that part gets broadcast as widely as possible through a number of ways, so that folks are able to replicate this project, because the project is definitely incomplete. There are things that could continue to happen, but I am not going to do them. I am moving on. I did the skill, I got what I needed to do. I'm here for a good time, not a long time, so I'm ready to move on to another project.
Nice, and that's the benefit of working with technology, this idea of iterating 1.0, 1.1, 2.1, and all that, the different lives one thing can have. Mindy, I really appreciated in your presentation, you kind of took us into the architecture and the meta text and the function of the website. So I'm thinking, you even stated in your presentation, the site is always in progress. So when we read it, I thought, it's genuine, authentic, and transparent. So as designers and artists, is there an expectation to have a completed piece? Can you talk about how your work speaks to always being in progress?
I think that we're kind of in an era where everyone wants to be the innovator and no one wants to be the maintainer. And I'm really trying to practice this idea of what a lifelong project looks like to the best of our ability now. So what that means for me is, even if I feel like the website is done now, in 2 months, if there's a browser update and something breaks, then we'll have to fix that. So I think that because it's a living archive, crowdsourced, moderated, etc., we're basically committing ourselves to trying to make sure this thing grows with the healthiest lifespan possible, and that requires a lot of commitment and maintenance. And I think everyone working with new technologies can understand that, because these technologies just degrade so quickly. So an archival practice really does feel like a practice of maintenance and patience. Yeah.
And in thinking about, developing something new with technology, writing code, LaJuné, can you draw parallels between developing software code and choreography and movement?
So I think for me, I guess I could connect this to this idea of improvisation. I think that for me as a technologist, I'm always learning. I'm always learning about new, different tools and new technologies to work with, and how to integrate them into my practice and into my work. But when I am performing with my collaborators, I am considering myself sort of even outside of the technologist role into a sort of maybe unseen performer on the side. And so, I haven't really played too much with me being like seen or me being like accessible like during a performance. But it's really a conversation between me and my collaborators, where they're moving and then I'm responding to their movements, and then I'm also collaborating with the sound technician, and so I'm collaborating with their sound and just playing around with like different cues and stuff. I think that when it comes to my movement practice, I've been really focused on finding ways to sort of think about how to use the body as a way to hack digital technologies. So what does it mean to use embodiment as a practice that can change the landscapes of the technologies that we're using? And so that's been really interesting for me, sort of just always moving, always working in different ways and through different mediums.
Thank you. I'm gonna kind of open up, pose two questions at the same time to the group before we get some Q&A from the audience. So the two of them are, and you could talk around them, you can combine them, or answer a different question that you have for yourself. What are rich areas for play and exploration with regards to art and data science? And the second one is, we're all artists and designers who work with cloud-based technology, screens, and we know that a lot of these things have a negative impact on our physical and mental health. Computer processors contain precious metals from Africa whose extraction creates inequity, and also technologies that ultimately harm our environment. So how do we as practitioners who use these tools contend with these issues?
Jump in first. Check. Maybe I can't. There we go. Okay. I can jump in first. So my intended audience for the projects that I'm working on throughout this fellowship is really museum professionals or GLAM professionals, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, who are working at smaller institutions. And so I'm really excited to share out these methodologies. In addition to the TikTok videos that I've created, I'm actually a part of the Association of African American Museums, one of the working groups. There's 3 working groups. I'm on the Traveling, Shared, and Collaborative Exhibitions working group, and so we're looking for ways to build capacity through these measures. And 2 of us work in DH. Everyone else is kind of a more traditional museum person. So as we're kind of identifying different things that we can do with this group to kind of help the member institutions build capacity by collaborating with each other, there are 2 of us that are kind of always off to the side, like in technology and AR and holograms, like how can we get that in there? Because it's really important for us to be in that space creating these things for ourselves, right? We're making so much money for tech billionaires by using their software and making their shareholders happy. All of the trends that you see on TikTok and RIP Vine, Instagram, all of that is coming a lot of times from young Black creatives who are often, as we know, not getting any credit for the things that they're doing. They're definitely not getting a piece of that billions plural that these folks in Silicon Valley are making. So if we're able to enter these spaces and start determining how this technology is going to work for ourselves, I think that'll kind of change the way things are moving in the future. Also, a lot of times when I give a presentation about this project, there's usually someone who approaches me about, hopefully no one's here tonight and plan to do this because this is going to sound really shady. But there's always somebody that's like working for an AR company and they're like, oh, we should talk. No, we shouldn't. Let me tell you why. Because I'm not trying to encourage these small institutions that don't have a grant writer on staff, can't necessarily afford to hire one, to seek out these 5 and 6 figure dollar like funding sources when they could really just get a small grant from a local politician, which is a lot easier to manage because a lot of times they're already giving to those institutions. When I worked at one, we always had county council people giving us fundings, like a couple $1,000s to do stuff in their district. So you could easily just get a small little like $2,000, $3,000 grant from a local politician or another funding source, whatever it is, but something that's a little less competitive that your institution can internally handle to do the work inside the institution. To have someone who is willing and able to learn the technology and can do it that way rather than contracting someone else to build something that they might even own after it's done. So now you don't own your technology, and it's just too complicated that way. It is hard to learn this stuff. My brain crashed several times. There was times where I was like, I'm gonna flip a table, or a student. But I got there, and I'm happy to help people, right? So as long as we continue to build community and can share resources, how we learned, or even teaching things, then that can create more and more folks that are able to start doing this work for ourselves, by ourselves. Because FUBU is always my motto, y'all, always my motto.
To build on to Dr. Smith's point, it's apparent to everyone here that we are living in an era run by platform oligopolies. So no matter how much you think that you are not being coerced into using certain things, we most certainly are because they're free and easy to use. I think to build on this, what's nice about these things, or as working as artists or designers or creative people, is you can ultimately use these platform structures in ways that they aren't intended to be used. So artists often are able to experiment with these things to find the breaking points of these certain tools, or subverting the intended uses of these tools. So I think in that way, it's actually an interim solution while people are kind of building other things from the ground up. I think in this open source model, it works rather well, except it's really hard to maintain things when you don't have bandwidth and resources to maintain things. So while a lot of these things are being created now, and other people are on the other side working with platform oligopolies and perhaps subverting their uses, we kind of have this middle area of how can we actually redistribute resources. This is why we see all these kind of like tokenized equity things appearing in Microsoft and etc. But I do think that this idea of trying to use something at our disposal and kind of, this is the essence of institutional critique, right? That you're inside the institution or the platform and kind of revealing the things along the way. And I think this is a nice pairing with people who are outside of the platform or outside of the institution. They're very complementary.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think for me, the whole reason why I started building the library in the first place was to make sure that I could find access to the tools that I had no longer had access to. And so how I've been sort of operating for the past few years working on this space is working with various different institutions and basically trying to see like, okay, what kind of resources do those institutions have? And so, for instance, like maybe one institution would help me on the sort of workshop basis of the library, and maybe one other would help me on the performance side, and one other would actually just give me resources to build the VR out. And so yeah, I basically I go in. I see what the resources are, I play to those resources, and then I pack my bags and But I am very grateful, and I do have some long-standing institutions that I do work with consistently in various different capacities. But this year, I am planning to turn the library into its own institution. And so I think that by getting all of the resources and by seeing the way that it's morphed and changed over time, through its various different iterations, to finally have one place with all of the aspects of the library, that's very important to me. And also, to that point, did I forget what I was going to say? I think that we should focus on building our own institutions. And also it's been really helpful because when I do work with different institutions, I can sort of also look into how they operate. And so, and sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't agree, but I'm just like a maneuver, like someone who just sort of just peeks in, pretty nosy, yeah.
Yeah, you can learn a lot from dysfunction. Trust me. So now we're going to open up the floor. If folks in the room have any questions, I think we can pass around a roving microphone. Anybody? Or if there are questions in the chat. We have a question here.
I think it's kind of a thank you all for sharing. This is just really wonderful. I appreciate your generosity and sharing your practice. And I'm sorry I can't believe, but Dr. Smith, how can someone become a part of some of those groups and join some of those organizations that you're doing to kind of take this through, like the person?
So you can definitely become a member of the Association of African American Museums. And they don't pay me to say this. I just really love being a part of this professional association. It's been a dream come true. Tons of opportunities there. They have programming catered toward your specific membership level. So they've got student, emerging museum professional, individuals, and institutions depending on your budget. I think that determines how much your membership costs. And so what we're trying to do with this working group, it's just a thing we had to apply to participate in, but our goal is to create, do some workshops for members to come in and learn these skills. I'm also, as I mentioned before, I work at Temple University Libraries. We will be doing our second Black Digital Humanities Symposium in April. We did the first one this past April. And with that, we also have a workshop where we talk about professional pathways within Black Digital Humanities. They were two separate events last year, and the two of us that worked on them, we were like, let's just combine forces because we both worked on these things anyways. So now it's gonna be like a Thursday for the symposium, a Friday for the workshop. I think the working groups at Temple are also open possibly to anyone. I'm not 100% sure about that. But I'm always looking for ways to continue to share the wealth or just be in communication with other folks who are doing this type of work to learn what they're doing, which is why it's so nice to be on this panel because you guys are amazing. So I guess that's the answer to the question.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Nice to see you watching. It was a pleasure. I had not loud enough, sorry.
Okay, you can hear me now. So there was a few words mentioned that I was super interested by. I hope to just bring them back. I don't know if it's a full thought, but I'll offer it as a provocation to everyone, maybe. There was words like institution and auto-institution, and those have very different meanings for each of you all, it sounded like. And there were also words like memory. And I wondered about the interplay between those things, coming from each of your particular projects that you offered. It seems like there's something about intervention in both of those that is operating for everyone, but maybe just to hold space for communicating how memory, an intervention of memory, maybe intervention of these terms institution are alive for you in these projects or in your practice in general. Yeah.
This doesn't have the word memory or institution in it, but I think it's related. I often refer to this quote by the indigenous technologist Amelia Winger-Bearskin. She says, "History is written by the victors, so the future will be written by the vectors," which I like because it implies this sense of nodes or collectivity. So institutional memory, I think, is quite political. And even Saidiya Hartman talks about critical fabulation, how because when we reflect back on these histories or memories, often they're told from a very singular perspective. So it's kind of our responsibility as scholars, artists, etc., to critically fabulate and make three-dimensional these people who kind of had these marginal storylines. So I think in this way, to answer your question directly, it's that memory, and especially institutional memory, is quite malleable, and that, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, kind of falls in the hands of people in this room.
I guess for me, I actually also remembered my thought before too. So I'm gonna connect the two. What I love about libraries is that there are various different ways to interact and be in a library. You don't have to read books when you go there, but you can. You don't actually have to do anything. I feel like there are certain folks who will go into a library because they don't have air conditioning and the library has air conditioning. And so there are so many different things that libraries as institutions can provide as a sort of community building and community preserving tool. And so I think for me, I always refer to the Black Movement Library as a future library. So what would a library of the future be like? What kind of various different modes can that library exist in that can actually provide not only just space to be in and space to learn in, but also spaces to grow and do radical work in. So how can I be a steward of a space, be a caretaker of a space that that provides that for folks to come together and do that work together. And so yeah, I think that it's important. I guess various different institutions that I look at and work with and interact with and move through. Some of them are doing that work, but then others clearly are not. They sort of operate as a way to create barriers to access to spaces, which was one of my major issues with academia, because pretty much academia rejected me, and then when I started doing this work, they all of a sudden turned around and was like, ooh, come back, So I think that was really an important lesson for me as an artist and as an educator too, because it reminded me that yes, while I may be teaching at various different universities, that's not why I'm doing this work. I'm not doing this work to just stay in that space. I'm doing this work to really open up the doors and really create ways for various different voices to have a say in how we build the space that we are in. Because I just think that it's important. I think it's important that not necessarily everyone uses motion capture technology, but to be in the room with a motion capture suit and a motion capture studio, I think that that's important, to be able to say that you have access to just be there. And so, yeah, I think that, I'm just going to end that there. That's not there.
What you said about academia reminded me of the prophet Mike Jones quote. Back then they didn't want me, now I'm hot, they all on me. So there is a quote from poet, musician, and activist War Mother Goddess that I wanted to read in response to that. She talks about the anthropology of consciousness to explain how we calculate the relationship between space in our bodies, our living spaces, and the ways in which these things affect the way we remember or forget our past and future memories. And I really like this quote because not only am I an anthropologist, coincidentally, but it also speaks to kind of the way that I do my work. The fellowship that I'm in right now is for data curation, which none of us knew what it was before we started. I don't know if I totally understand it now, but I just do the thing that I'm being paid to do, which is play. But also because of the way that I work and the departments that I work in, I have a lot of support and encouragement and the freedom to do a lot of the speculative work and just kind of see what works, what doesn't work, what I'm interested in, and move from there rather than being bound by institutional priorities or, like I said earlier, the curatorial schedule or something like that. I can just kind of float in my own little zone and do my thing and present it all over the place. And it makes the institutions look good, of course. They love it, right? Because they want us to present as often as possible and just make them look great, regardless of how much work they may have actually participated in. But I am appreciative of the opportunity to do that and not be so tied to the way that academia works with publishing and all of that. I'm totally not interested in any of it. I just want to work on my little projects and move on. So I really like that. Okay.
And we're coming to the end of the hour. We might even be over a little bit, but I just want to know if there's any additional questions or any kind of thoughts or reflections.
Sorry, we've got one question from the Zoom that I'd like to follow that up with. And get one in there. How can technology expand our sensory experiences? I'm often concerned that institutions use these technologies to actually supplant imaginative responses. How can you keep texture, color, and physicality of objects and surfaces?
I have a super, super short response. So it's something that I've been thinking about with VR. So that's the thing that I'm pivoting to now, is learning how to kind of build a VR interactive space that kind of replicates a museum experience without being bound by it. A lot of times when you're in a museum, you can't touch anything, right? Whereas with VR, I've made 3D models of objects that are in the collections of these two institutions that might not really be on display. When I was working with them, they were housed in the archive or in the collections building, so they weren't even out there for folks to see. And you have to kind of know what you're looking for to find them on the collections page of the website, I think. So within a VR space, you're able to interact with those things. You're not physically actually touching things, but it's still kind of mimicking that activity, which is something that you don't get to necessarily do within a physical museum because there's a rope around everything. And even some museums have like sensors to make sure you don't get too close. So I think VR is a really good way to use technology to kind of subvert some of the things that happen in physical space so that you can have a more dynamic experience with those objects. Jury's still out if that really works. I'm just starting this.
Be an artist. So I think for me, being able to work with these tools, just like to speak a little bit more, like I use Unreal Engine, which is made by Epic Games, and Epic Games makes all various different video games like Fortnite, and all various different types of like games. They also use it for movies, all different types of stuff. And so for me, I use this tool too, but in a totally different way, in a totally different context. And then I also keep space for critique of the tool too. And so, yeah, I think that with my process, because I'm not bound by making work in a particular pipeline in a particular way, I'm just trying to make the work that I want to make, but also the work that, I guess like the work that I think matters. I'm able to sort of like use the tool in a way that you normally wouldn't use it in. And so I think being an artist is an important, it's an important field, but it's just really hard. It's hard to like live as an artist, of course. And so I would say just keep working with these tools and keep playing around with them and keep pushing them to do things beyond what they were meant to do. Because also I feel what I do love about Unreal Engine is that for me I use it as a manifesting tool. So in my mind I'm manifesting liberated realities through world building with Unreal. And so in that context, I decide to build worlds and realities that you normally wouldn't see. Or I guess like for me, I would say that I'm accessing different portals, portals to liberation, portals to my ancestors, to my spirit guides. And I'm just using this as a visualizer of that process. But also I'm integrating various other technologies too, embodied technologies, ancestral technologies, to be able to fully like visually realize these sort of experiences. And so yeah, I think that when you're an artist, you're able to do so many things and to really push the boundaries of what a work can do and what it can be. So yeah.
And I know we're short on time, so I'll just second LaJuné's point very quickly. But I think right now we're kind of in this crisis of imagination. I just gave this talk on the Zuckerberg's metaverse, so it's really interesting to be in these like VR environments that are basically replicas of our physical environments. And if you replicate physical environments, you will feel sensory deprivation because it doesn't map to the sensories we have in physical environments. If we create other visuals or landscapes that are intended to be in virtual environments, it actually might feel like a sensory overload or some sort of emancipation of certain senses that might feel a bit stilted in our physical realities. So I think it's just about rethinking virtual realities and not trying to map it to what we do in physical space.
It's a wonderful point. I really want to thank you all for being so brilliant and sharing your practice with us this evening, Mindy, LaJuné, and Dr. Smith. Thank you. A few other bits of gratitude I want to express to University of Pennsylvania and PHDC, and my folks, my friends, my colleagues at Dashboard and the Cascode team, Amanda, Rudy, Chrissy, Oshun, Abigail, and Michael DiCarlo, our amazing computational designer, who's been supporting this project as well, but he's now in Barcelona. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for this evening.